To cover several points here, especially the idea of the timeline and who is the proper author of the timeline, I'm really not sure. My suspicion is that the timeline was unconsciously taken from the Church of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, where they have a very, very similar device for organizing time thought, and that is what they call the time track. What they do is something called auditing. In Scientology, they have a structured series of questions and interrogative processes that involve something called an e-meter. The specific goal of the auditing is to move around on the time track, to move forward or backward on the time track. And this concept, I don't know when precisely this was introduced by L. Ron Hubbard in Scientology, perhaps as early as the 1950s, and it is difficult, if not impossible, for me to believe that a concept that had been so fully ingrained in the California culture, these Scientology ideas, the idea of the reactive mind, the idea of engrams and memories, it's very hard for me not to start to think, and perhaps you may be starting to think as well, depending on which trance you're in at the moment, or not, that Scientology didn't have a significant impact, although perhaps a hidden impact, perhaps a denied impact or a suppressed impact. But many of the features that seem to have developed in the art and the practice and the craft of NLP, with one distinction, and the one distinction is, to my knowledge, Scientology has no concept of modeling. Modeling is the one place where many of the ideas that developed out of NLP are clearly distinct from their precursors, is in that area of modeling. But in the area of timeline, time track, I think even submodalities, because the Scientologists talk a great deal about inner pictures, where you see them, your inner perceptions. At this point, I simply cannot deny in my own mind that a great deal of one part of NLP surely seems, in fairly specific ways, to be directly drawn from the beliefs and doctrines and practices of Scientology. Now, I don't think that that's a problem. You can say, sure, modern chemistry evolved out of alchemy, and that does not mean that there's anything about modern chemistry that is similar in the sense of magical practice to what we would see in the practices of alchemy, which were much more about magical transformations of substances, or in the Jungian idea, their alchemical models of consciousness, which I believe also have validity, and we should look at those things. The Scientologists believe that the time track can be addressed very specifically, that we can move around on it, we can see what they refer to as incidents, and incidents that have resulted in these kind of stampings or renderings into sort of physical matter of the mind on the time track. And so one of their goals, I think, is to be able to move very, very freely without becoming stuck at various points on the time track. The time track is quite useful, and I think it's something we can develop. We could take that to more refined levels. So why not? What prevents us from doing that? I don't think anything really, other than just our willingness to do it and willingness to engage it. And I think also a willingness simply to accept that your sources are your sources. Don't be coy about them, even if they may be somewhat embarrassing or strange, or contrary to the image you would like to present to the public. There's also value in just simply being truthful and saying, yeah, that's probably where it came from. And then I notice a lot of people, in many cases, are grabbing for, sort of attaching themselves to the origin of an idea. When I was very involved with EST, which is the thing that came before the Landmark Forum, est was taken from Scientology wholesale. Many of the terms, precise language, precise terminology and beliefs had been lifted directly from Scientology and repackaged as est. The one thing est didn't have that was the part of Scientology was the time track. Est never talked about the time track, but it talked about a lot of other things using absolutely the direct vocabulary of Scientology. So it's kind of funny that Scientology did give birth to many of these California para-religion, sciences of mind, ways of thinking. And we can say, yes, we've moved beyond those things. We are not doing those practices. We're doing other practices. And in some ways, we're doing somewhat similar practices. Should we go back and look at what they're thinking? Maybe, to some extent, to some degree. But that's my little take on the timeline. And we can do a lot of stuff with the timeline, and a lot of trances with the timeline, a lot of trance work, a lot of induction, a lot of excellent work. So I think maybe we could have a few more looks at what they were saying, and maybe we could develop it. The timeline to me seems to be, in NLP, a somewhat undeveloped concept, something that could use more fleshing out, more practice, more precision, wherever we go to get those precisions. But let's think a lot about the use of time track and time track trances and orientation on the time track and how we can gain maximal value add from this concept. So that's my little thought for the day.